So the first thing that I want to do, of course, and Jesus already did this, but I do want to thank our speakers. Again, we could not do this without the speakers, so thank you so much. And definitely thanks to the audience out there. I mean, again, we wouldn't have anybody to speak to if it wasn't for you. So very much appreciate you taking your time out of your busy day and joining us here for the sessions in OSS Day. A quick note on TIBCO, one slide, just to give a quick description. TIBCO is an enterprise software company, been around for 25 plus years, works in a number of different verticals for Fortune 500 organizations, and is really focused on data. How do you connect to data, regardless of where it's coming from? How do you really enrich that data with predictive capabilities and analytics? And then how do you unify all that information together, whether it's through metadata management, master data management, data catalogs, or data virtualization? So a lot of the work that we focus on is really around data. But of course, as you're dealing with data, a large part of it has to do with innovation. How are you going to innovate within your organization in order to be able to better deal with data, not just now, but also in the future? So I always say innovation is a huge opportunity, but it's not just for IT. When you look at innovation, innovation has to be built into the culture of the organization. It has to be part of the org structure. It has to be it just has to be part of what people do. And so when I look at innovation, you're looking at a number of different reasons as to why it is very, very important. Obviously, you need to be able to compete. You want to be able to innovate so that you can deliver better products and services, and you want to do so in a way that is much more streamlined, efficient, fun, whatever it happens to be, than the next guy. So you definitely have to be able to use innovation to compete. You want to use innovation to engage in new ways. You want to use innovation to be unique. You also want to use innovation in many ways to change perception. So many organizations going into, of course, the circumstances we find ourselves in today, really needed to change perception about who they are and how they deliver goods and services. And the organizations that quickly pivoted were able to do so in many cases. And then finally, when you get right down to it, innovation is really driving how you provide products and services to your customers, to your partners, to other organizations, and so on. So it's definitely a key element of what it is that you need to do, and it is not just a responsibility of IT. So one of the things I often get asked is, what are you thinking about when it comes to what comes after our current digital transformation strategies? So right now, a lot of my customers are focused on data. How do I move from legacy on-prem sort of data stores into the cloud? How do I better leverage the capabilities of the cloud? How do I create that hybrid architecture? I still have stuff on-prem. I'm going to have things in the cloud. How do I make that appear to be seamless to my customers and partners? So that's a large part of the focus of today. But what's next? And so I usually go through a number of different areas. I'm just going to touch on 4 for today. The first thing that I talk about is this growth and explosion in the need to operate in an environment that is very highly connected. So it's no longer just about an organization reaching out to a customer. It's about multiple organizations collaborating together to provide capabilities to the broader customer set. And it may not just be a single customer, but it could be a customer through a partner, through another interaction, through another organization. And then how do you bring all that together into a complete holistic picture? Right? The globe is highly connected. And we want to make sure that we're providing solutions and capabilities to leverage that connectiveness, if you will. The second thing that I'll often talk about is this idea of everything becoming more, in some ways, decentralized. And I use IoT as a great example of this. If I'm building solutions, I'm distributing IoT devices out there to augment those solutions. The way in which I need to process all that information becomes very decentralized. I cannot afford to bring all the data back, run it in the cloud, to get some sort of answer, and then push it back to the IoT device to generate a response. This world is becoming much more decentralized. And that is also some of the nature of this, the fact that it's becoming highly connected. The other thing I'll talk about is this idea of to do all the abilities, as I call it. So I need to do this with the right level of integrity, the right level of accuracy, the right level of security, the right level of quality, right? These are all elements that, of course, we've always focused on, but they even become more important as we look at this highly connected world. And then finally, this is a phrase that's out there, life after SMAC. So the idea that it's life after social, life after mobile, life after analytics, and life after cloud, right? And that is the puzzle that we're trying to solve. We're trying to look and say, well, what is next? We have our digital transformation strategies today. We want to be able to set ourselves up for the future, but what does that future look like? And that is really the problem that we're trying to solve for. And that's where a lot of the innovation comes from with an open source standpoint, because it's helping to build solutions to support these aspects. So that then leads to new application models. And I always talk about new applications, the ones that we're building now, the ones that we'll be building in the future, are not going to have AI and ML and those kinds of things as an add-on. They're going to be embedded. They're going to be part of the core system. It's going to be what the application does. And then everything else will be built around that. And that everything else can really be comprised of a number of different things. And I've just listed a few on the slides here. But this could be anything from distributed data fabrics to real time, to new business models, right? Imagine if I go back to my IoT use case, if I have devices talking to one another and paying one another for capabilities. Lots of opportunity there for new business models, broad networks of functionality. And remember, this is not just a technology problem. This is also very much related to culture, it's related to organizational structure and so on. So AI at the core, that's the foundation. That is the way in which applications are going to be built. And then they're going to be wrapped with some of these other capabilities. These are just examples that I'm providing for today. Another interesting concept that has been around for a while, but you're starting to see the convergence of all these different technologies that actually makes this approach much more possible when you're building applications. And this is the idea of autonomic computing, where you often hear the idea of belief, desire, intent. So the idea is that if I can have kind of autonomous software agents running in my environment, communicating with one another through real-time message passing, all aware of certain context and state, all aware of the idea of time, and all of them are working together in order to achieve a certain goal within a certain number of constraints. That, in essence, is what we're looking at when it comes to autonomic computing. So I always use the example of an airport. Airports have lots of stuff typically going on at any one time. You have the flights, you have crews, you have maintenance, you have the food truck, you have the fueling truck, right? There's a lot of things going on at any one point in time. Those can all be powered by these autonomous software agents, collaborating and working together to make sure that they're optimizing for, in this case, the goal could be minimum turnaround time, right? The time between when the plane pulls into the gate and when it departs to go off and take on another journey. And so that's the idea. And we're starting to look at building systems that can operate and function in this way. So it's kind of an interesting trend that it really brings together this convergence of all these different technologies. Now, some of the technologies that will support this, again, this is quite vast, but I'm just going to talk about 4 here today. It's really around things like digital twins. It's around IoT and edge analytics. It's around advanced analytics. And it's also around extended reality. Okay, these are 4 kind of interesting areas of technology that we're seeing help drive this move to post-digital transformation strategies. Now, the first thing is really around digital twins. Digital twins, we've heard about them before, typically in the context of a device. If I have a digital representation of an expensive piece of equipment, it's much cheaper for me to run simulations against the digital view of that equipment than it is against the actual physical piece of equipment. Very expensive. If I break it, not going to work very well. Much cheaper to do that on a digital representation. The digital twins can also represent people. Imagine if I have a contextual real-time image of a passenger or of a patient or of a customer. Now what could I do? How could I interact with that individual in a much more seamless and contextual fashion and give them the information they need at exactly the moment they need it? A digital twin can help achieve that. Digital twins can also apply to processes. Right? We do a lot of work with process mining within the TIBCO Labs organization. And it's really the precursor to being able to understand what you need to focus on for automation. A digital twin can be utilized to really augment and automate and manage and govern, and it really run as almost like a sidecar into real world physical processes that are running in your organization or even across organizations. And then finally, if you bring all these together, you can create a digital twin of an organization. How does your organization function? How do I simulate certain aspects of the organization and see where and how I could make an improvement? So digital twins, wonderful, always very, very relevant when it comes to equipment, but they don't just apply to equipment. They definitely have value in a number of other areas. The second one is really around advanced analytics. And some of this, of course, is just due to how do I make a better model? How do I make the model smarter? How do I make the model respond faster? All those kinds of things. Yes, that all applies. A lot of work going on in that area. Computer vision is another area that we play in. A lot of work happening in that space. But I'm also looking at some of the areas that kind of go around analytics, for things like data and data quality. How do I gather the volume of data that I need and make it of sufficient quality so that I know that I can depend on my model? In certain circumstances, I actually may not have the right amount of data. And so how do I generate it? So there's a lot of work now being done around synthetic data sets. And how do I properly build a data set which best represents the real world, right? Without building in bias and all those kinds of things that we're trying to avoid. Even topics like responsible AI. How much AI is too much? Right? These are all questions that we need to address as part of the overall strategy when it comes to advanced analytics. So yes, it's also about the models, but it also includes a lot of these other aspects as well. Extended reality is really just going to change the way in which we operate with the physical world. And these lines are blurring. So the idea that I could actually emulate or simulate a completely different environment and then immerse people into that environment for the purposes of training, for the purposes of simulation, for the purposes of optimization, right? That is very, very exciting. And we've seen a lot of accelerated movement in this area simply because we're all currently at home. And so creating much more immersive, visually rich experiences and getting the data to those experiences at the right time, all very, very important. And we're seeing a lot of growth in this area as well. And then finally, IoT and edge. When you look at IoT, IoT has been around for a long time. I've got customers, oil and gas space and utilities and things like that. They've been doing IoT for a long period of time. The concept itself is not new. But now with the emergence of cloud and the emergence of other technologies such as 5G, we're seeing much more adoption and much more interest in how IoT can be applied to other types of use cases, whether that's the remote health or telehealth concepts, whether that's smart city, smart grid initiatives, or whether that's from an industrial context. We're seeing a lot more IoT being investigated and deployed. Now, a large part of what goes along with that is the idea that, as I mentioned earlier, we're starting to have to deal with much more decentralized architectures. And so IoT is really facilitating that. And so I can get data from an IoT device or a series of devices, and rather than send all that information back to the cloud, I may choose to process that at the edge or close to the edge, right? Reduce decision latency, make sure that I can make and identify opportunities or look at threats earlier or things like that, really make my response times very minimal. So I can optimize the response that I need to make in order for that certain circumstance. Right? So we're seeing a lot of this movement to IoT, yes, but also towards a push of taking my logic and pushing out to the edge. Hyper-personalization is a great example of this. So this is now where I'm going to bring together my very rich immersive experience through extended reality. I'm going to augment that with IoT and IoT-derived data. I'm going to use advanced analytics and the capabilities around that to make sure that the interactions are much more intelligent. And I'm also going to look at digital twins, the digital twin of an individual. Right now, I can get products and services that are tailored to me as a person at the right time, when I need it, based upon my current state, the current context, who I am, what I've done, what I did 2 seconds ago. Right? This idea of hyper-personalization, we're starting to see this as well, brings together some of these examples that I just talked about. Right? And so it takes us now to that next world, if you will. I don't know if it's quite the Minority Report, the movie yet, but there's certain aspects of it that are becoming eerily similar when it comes right down to it. Now, as I mentioned, you're going to hear this throughout the rest of today's session, but open source is a critical element of all these different aspects that I've talked about. I call this my buzzword compliance slide because there's obviously a lot of sort of new and cool sort of technology and trends and things like that on this slide. But when you look at the door or underneath the covers behind them and open the door, you'll see that open source is driving innovation in pretty much every one of these items that you see on the screen, and of course in a number of other categories of technology as well. So open source is critical. We do believe in open source. We do produce, as TIBCO and TIBCO Labs, a number of projects as open source, but really it's about the community, it's about collaboration, it's about innovation. So with that, Jesus, I'm going to turn things back over to you. Everybody, please enjoy the rest of the sessions. Feel free to check out the rest of the event and definitely ask the speakers all those hard questions, all those things that you really want to know. Appreciate your time, everybody. Thanks so much, and have a good rest of the day.